I love the liveliness, the constant feeling of energy.
Definitely the world-class education.
The diversity. Nah, the nightlife.
I would say the people.
For me, it's the stories. My name is Mo Waja, and welcome to Toronto Story Archive. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Toronto Story Archive. So, in my life, I've moved to Toronto twice, and both times were very, very different. The first was just out of high school. I had just been accepted to the University of Toronto for chemical engineering. I was 17, and although I was on downtown campus, I lived in Mississauga with my grandparents. I arrived in Toronto that year a little nervous, but 90% excited. But this outlook changed completely only like a month into the program. To be frank, I hated it. The people were great, but the program was nothing like I imagined it would be, which is fair, considering I chose the program based on the idea that, hey, I like science after winning the regional science fair in North Bay and then taking home an award or two at the national science fair. Now, a big part of me wanted to quit the program, to drop out, but an even bigger part of me loved Toronto and didn't want to go back to North Bay. The end result was that I spent a lot of time playing foosball in the common room. I'm quite good at foosball. But in the end, I bombed out. And bombed out big time. After only a semester at U of T, I failed out of chemical engineering and was forced to go back to North Bay. Now, once there, I was more than ready to hang it up, to get a job, and then apply again to something else, something less demanding next year. But after some not so gentle urging from my parents, I walked one morning into Nipissing University in North Bay and applied, and was accepted to their Bachelor of Commerce Business Administration program. In that year, I made no friends. I kept my head down, I did my work, and I did well. Well, I did alright. I did alright in most of my classes. Accounting was just the worst. It's still the worst. I'm like one of those people who's right on the deadline for submitting their taxes. Anyway, at the end of that year, I achieved my goal. I was accepted to the business management program at Ryerson University in the Ted Rogers School of Management. Now, my second coming to Toronto was very different from the first. I was 18, turning 19 now, but instead of living with family, I had an apartment at Yonge and Eglinton, and I came in 100% nervous, desperate not to have a repeat of the year before and find myself sent packing again. It was only a year into my degree at Ryerson, a year of, not failing at everything, that I felt ready to begin engaging with student life. And that year to me was really the beginning of my university career. Moreover, many of the events that took place in that year and the years that followed served as the catalyst for my decisions that led me on a journey to speak professionally and even start this very podcast. In fact, it was only a few months back that things for me came full circle. You see, the first speaking competition that I ever outright won, the first speaking competition and the first opportunity that really ignited my passion for public speaking was Ryerson's Next Top Speaker, hosted by Ryerson's Toastmasters. And like how I won it, well, that's a story for another time. A few months ago, however, in March, I had the honor of sitting as a judge on Ryerson's Next Top Speaker 2017. And this week's guest was such a compelling orator that I had the pleasure of being part of the panel that awarded him second place at RNTS 17. This week, I have the pleasure of chatting with Melo. Mikael is a media production student at Ryerson University, a social media marketer, and a producer within Toronto's entertainment sector. Coming at us from the downtown core, welcome Mikael.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Mikael. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Every day in the city is a great day, so I can't complain.
That is absolutely true, especially, now the weather's warm, it's nice outside. I mean, this is the best part of being in Toronto. When summer is here, summer's right on the cusp, it's fantastic.
Tell me about it. There's always something to do. I love how in Toronto you can just step outside and you'll find random things. Like I remember last summer, one day I was just walking with my friends and then there was this surf machine where people were just out and about surfing in the middle of Dundas Square, and I was like, this is the coolest city to be in.
That's fantastic. And I guess that leads to my first question, the one main question we ask everyone who comes onto Toronto Story Archive. And you might have just answered it, but I'll take another answer then. I'll take another one then. What is one thing you love about Toronto?
One thing I love about Toronto is how different it is. And by different, I mean it's different in terms of the people that you meet and the things that you do or could do, and every day it's never the same, right? Like the location's the same, but you're never going to see the same event, the same person, the same things. At, like it just always is a constant change, and I think that's something that's so amazing. It's never really a dull moment, and that's what I really love about Toronto is that yesterday might have been like a not great day, but today could be an amazing day, and it just all depends on what's going on around you.
It's absolutely true. I mean, Dundas Square. Dundas Square, where we both spent or spend a lot of time, is a prime example of that. I mean, I remember the one time I was going through Dundas Square, and there was this band of musicians playing, and I listened to their music, and it was phenomenal. The guy was playing the pan flutes. It was fantastic, and I was like, all right, I don't have cash on me right now, but tomorrow I'm gonna come back and I am going to buy this guy's tape. But the next day I came back and there was some dude throwing fire there. It was only like a month later that I actually saw them again in time to buy their music. So yeah, like everything there's always something different. And I guess you must be experiencing a lot of that. I mean, being in Ryerson right in the midst of it all.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I actually just moved into this new condo, and my condo is like my balcony looks right out to Dundas Square. It's on Dundas and Victoria. And even last night, I had a friend
Fantastic.
over and we were watching a movie, and there was like a mini concert going on. So we turned off the movie, went on my balcony. It was just that thing, like exactly what you're saying. Like you never know what's gonna be out there, and it was such an amazing band performing, and it was I love being so close to downtown.
It's so interesting the music you find here, right? I mean, I was talking to another guest recently on Toronto Story Archive, and they were talking all about music, all about the various types of music that you find and see in the city. Now, coming from North Bay, we have our Heritage Festival, we have our events, and there you find your specific kinds of music. You have bands specifically coming to play in that festival, but I find that the variety here exposed me to so many many and varied aspects of music that I never would have had a chance to experience before. I mean, I credit Toronto entirely for teaching me salsa, for example.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think I love that. Not to say it forces you, but when you walk around, there's so many different cultures and music genres being thrown at you that like it really forces you to just kind of adapt and like learn to love every bit of it. Like I come from a very small town where like country music is kind of the big thing, and I'm not to discredit country music, but that's not my thing at all. So to come here and hear like salsa music or like some really good or to hear some really good rap music or hip hop just like as I'm casually walking to work, it's amazing. And like it's even cooler when I love going to the subway and just hearing buskers, because there's some really talented buskers out there that I'm like, why is no one giving them a record deal right now? Like, there's some really talented
Oh,
people in the
absolutely.
city.
No, it's true, right? It's absolutely true. When I go into the subway, it's so interesting the transitions you go through. Because I mean, at this stage of the game, I've been living in Toronto a good few years, and even so, I was at Downsview Station like a couple of days ago. I was at Downsview Station, and I get up to the top of the station, and this dude's just jamming out and playing Spanish music. And this is something I hadn't heard in a while, because usually you got your buskers playing the classics, but this dude, nah, he's going in a completely different direction, and he's just jamming out with the Spanish tunes. I don't even, I mean, I don't know the song because I don't speak Spanish, but it
Right.
was just it was amazing, right? It's amazing the variety of experiences.
I like so my parents were both born in Portugal and then they immigrated here to Canada, and so being Portuguese has been like very prominent in my background. So whenever I go to Trinity Bellwoods, I always like go to Little Portugal and stuff like that, and I love seeing people also perform like Portuguese music, or even like there was one day I was just in Trinity Bellwoods, and like a group of Portuguese dancers were just there like dancing to like traditional Portuguese music.
Oh
And
wow.
it's just so like to me it was like sentimental, because I'm like, oh man, I remember this when I was a kid and when I visited Portugal. But it's also cool to see it from like an outside perspective as someone who like doesn't know that, and they're being introduced. And I think being in Toronto is kind of like a learning experience as well, because you're constantly learning without even realize that you are, because you're taking in so much different traditions and cultures and diversity all into like one metropolitan city.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel almost like, I mean, I've visited a few countries in my life, but I feel in a very real way like I've gotten the chance to experience more culture, or more varieties of culture here in Toronto than I have almost anywhere else. Because I mean, while I have traveled to Spain and Morocco and Paris and whatnot, it's so interesting how in Toronto you can go from like little Portugal to little Italy to Greek town, which is where I live at the moment, and you get such a variety of food and people and music and everything.
Yeah, like I'm planning on backpacking Europe this summer, but my mom actually made this really funny joke to me recently. She's like, I don't know why you're backpacking Europe when you could just like spend a couple days in Toronto going to each little part, and you basically get a taste of the whole world.
And the cool thing is that even though I've been living here at this point for almost 10 years, I don't think I've visited all of them. I mean, I can actually almost entirely guarantee you that I have not visited all of them. But every time you go there, you meet new and interesting people.
100%. And I also think it's just sometimes you don't even realize that you're in those little like burrows or pods and stuff like that. For example, like my friend referred was just asking me if I'd ever been to Cabbage Town, and I was like, oh no, I've never been, blah blah. And then he was like, Michael, like we literally went to that restaurant that one time, like that's Cabbage Town. And sometimes I'm just like, oh man, like I wish there was like signs that was just like this is this and this is that, and especially like little Italy and little Portugal, like there's like no line, so you just like transition and then you just see the flags change, and you're like, oh okay, like now I'm here then, I guess.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think the biggest distinction that I ever got was I used to live around Close Avenue off King. So I was living in Parkdale just outside Liberty Village, and there was a distinction. You could see a distinct lack of gentrification in the Parkdale area versus Liberty Village is pretty fancy. But it was a hop, skip, and jump away, and now you're in a completely different world. Like the area around Trinity Bellwoods is very, very, very different, and it's just I always found it so interesting how Toronto has these micro cities that you can visit, that you can get into, and that will completely change your perspective on the people. It's hard to identify like who the people are per se, because there's such a variety of different people so closely intertwined. So you moved to Toronto from a fairly small town. Outside of moving away from jamming to Luke Bryan to listening to a little bit more, shall we say, cultured musical tastes, how did you find the transition? Like, how did you find that change?
I really enjoyed my transition. I think, as with any great experience, I was really scared to move to the city because, first of all, I didn't know anyone and I didn't really know what to expect, especially being thrusted into the downtown core right away by going to university. But it was such a great learning experience in the sense that you learn so much about yourself when, well, first of all, when you like move away from home and have to completely start from scratch with not knowing anyone, but just in the sense of like you adapt with the city. Like I noticed right away within my first month or two living in the city that my sense of style changed pretty drastically. Like I used to dress.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I used to be the type that I would go to the store with my sweatpants and but like like that was just like the town atmosphere I grew up in. And here I'm like, that's not okay. Like we can't do that. And I started dressing like a lot, classier or a lot like more preppier or even like, those Adidas white shoes and like the Nike like pants and all that stuff, like just getting into those trends. And
Oh,
I
for
don't know,
sure.
I think there's something about the city that like people just adapt to, and it's not like a forced change. It's something that you're excited to do and you're excited to grow in. And I think that was like a really great experience for me to just transition to, and also just like experiencing, because in my smaller town it's predominantly like Catholic people, and like getting to experience like
Hmm.
people of different religions and beliefs, or different like sexual orientations or genders and non-binary and stuff like that. Like it was very interesting. In my first year of university, I met my first like transgender friend, and they like opened my eyes, and it was such a great learning experience because we both came from different sides of the country, and we just like opened up. And I think there's so much to learn from each other, and that's what you get from Toronto, is like learning from the people here and the places here and all that stuff.
There absolutely is. I mean, before I moved to Parkdale, I spent a year living in the Church and Wellesley Village, and it was amazing. Easily one of my favorite places in the city. Easily one of my favorite places that I've ever lived in the city, because the people were fantastic and the noise was amazing. There was always something to do, always places to go, and I learned more from the people that I met in the Church of Wellesley Village than I had learned from people in ages, because it was such a different segment of the population. It's such a different segment of people that can teach you so much.
I also feel like I don't know what it is, but I could be like, it could be 4 o'clock in the morning, like the darkest hour, and I feel like with the Church in Wellesley area, it's such a friendly and welcoming community. Like I never feel unsafe there, and I think that comes from
Absolutely.
a history of like people coming together to make this positive community. And even downtown, like it has its moments where it's like late at night, but there's always someone watching. And I know one of my biggest fears coming into the city was like, oh, it like might be unsafe, blah, blah, blah. But I just feel like this downtown core is always so populated and always so welcoming that there's always always someone there to support you. And especially if you're a newcomer, I visited New York, and my first time in Times Square, I think I was 16 years old, and I bumped into someone, and I just said, oh, sorry. And they just turned to me, and they said, oh, you must not be from around here. And that stuck with me, because I was just like, man, like, what the heck? Like, people are so mean here. And that's not like to generalize all New Yorkers. There's some really nice ones out there.
For sure.
But coming to Toronto, it was just like everyone was nice. Like, I bumped into someone like my first week of university, like while I was in Dundas Square. And then they said, oh, I'm sorry. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. I'm like, this is the place for me. This is where I'm meant to be right now. So I love that sense here.
It's almost weird when someone's like, I mean, I was going for a run the other day, and I'm running, and this guy was walking ahead of me. So he stepped to the side for a second to let someone else pass. And I was like, oh, okay, great, opportunity. So I also went to run through. He let them pass, looked at me. I mean, he let the lady pass, looked at me, and then stepped directly into my way. So I moved around him, but I sort of nudged him a bit, and I'm like, oh, sorry, man, my apologies, right? And he looked at me, he's like, you can't wait? And I was like, really? That's so abnormal. It's such an abnormal thing here to have someone be rude, like outright rude to you for no particular, or even if they have a reason, because the culture of the city is to be polite, is to be like, oh, it's okay, or oh, I'm sorry. So it's a break from the norm for someone to do something different, which I found so unique here versus other places.
100%. Yeah, I think there's such like a joy with being like, I think with a lot of cities there is this stereotype or just this pressure of it not being polite, and like people finding themselves kind of trapped or isolated, I guess, in a sense. But with Toronto, I think it's quite the opposite. Like, if you just go out to a bar or a restaurant, it's very easy to make friends. Like, I can't tell you how many times that I've been at a restaurant and befriended the waiter, and then we added each other on Facebook and then became friends. Or just actually one of my favorite memories was one time I was coming home from a night out with some friends, and we decided to Uber pool, and the person we were Uber pooling with was someone who lived in my building. And now I see them all the time. I like see them in the gym. I see them like in the elevator and stuff. And we built this like new friendship. And it's just like, I don't know. I feel like in another city that wouldn't happen. You would just like not talk in an Uber pool ride. And I don't even know if they do Uber pool in like other smaller cities or larger cities, but I feel like it works so well here, and it's because of the people.
Absolutely. I mean, even when you're looking at like the service industry and people that you speak to on that level, I mean, back when I was living at Yonge and Eglinton, I would have like my dry cleaner. Well, they're my dry cleaner because if I really needed something on rush, be it to have something adjusted or to have something clean, they would do it for me because they were in a similar area. And you go there and you don't just hand them your things and leave. You hand them your things, you ask about them, you ask about their kids, you have a conversation.
Exactly.
And it's this relationship that's built up over time that I've found anyway, in my experience, that is almost somewhat lacking in especially other larger cities.
Yeah, there's something about Toronto that makes it personable. Like you go to a grocery store, a grocery store, and you get to know that cashier, and because you're going to do groceries often. The same thing with like, or seeing the dry cleaner or a hairdresser. I think that my hairdresser is probably one of my favorite people because I always go in and they're like, "You're back
Absolutely.
already? Like, has it been a month already? Like, what the heck?" And so I just think there's such a fun, lovable community here. And for to say the word community when you're talking about such a large city, I think says a lot about what that city
Well, it's
is.
almost
Because
weird, right? But yeah.
yeah, because you don't associate the two words often. Like you wouldn't say like a city is a community. Like usually a town is, or like a section or a school is a community. But when you say a city as a large is a community, like that speaks on so many levels. Or even like we have, this culture with Drake or Norm Kelly, and the fact that Norm Kelly will sometimes
Hmm.
come to the universities and like build this personable relationship with the people. I think that speaks a lot as well to like what kind of city we live in.
Excellent. Keep dropping Norm Kelly. Eventually, I want to get him on this podcast.
Exactly, yeah. This podcast is sponsored by Norm Kelly. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. But no, it's very true, right? It's very true, and it's a city of intersecting communities that let you get there. It's so funny that you mention the hairdresser thing, right? My hairdresser has completely the opposite reaction. Jenny, whenever I go there, she's like, "Oh, it's been so long. Oh my goodness, your hair is so much longer than it used to be." For those of you who don't follow me on Instagram, I have very long hair. But yeah, it's true, right? But it's a relationship. Like she, obviously she'll give me a free treatment now and then, and I help her out a bit with aspects of marketing as that she's unfamiliar with. So there's that exchange of value beyond just going in and paying for the service you want and leaving. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or even I think with past employers here too. Like I used to work at a music agency, and I still drop by and say hello, and like it's so different because I used to work in retail and stuff like that back home, and I don't really like talk to those people as much as I would like to. But with the people I worked with here, like I might not see them in so long, but the second we see each other, it's like we catch up, or they're like, "Oh my God, like I'm going to this concert, like
Hmm.
you want to come with?" And there's something fun about just like reconnecting with people. I think kind of what I said in the beginning, like you're not really going to say the same person every day, but what I kind of like is living downtown. I do see so many familiar faces. So, for example, like obviously I'm using fake names here, but let's say like on Monday I bump into Bob, who I haven't seen in like 4 months, and then Jenny I see
Hmm.
on Tuesday, and it just happens because you're going to the mall, you're walking to the gym, and it just you keep seeing the same people over and over again because this is where we live, and but you also connect with new people. I met a friend of mine who was from England, and I just met them because they were coming to a concert because they loved a Canadian artist, and so they flew all the way here, blah blah blah. And now when I go to backpack Europe, he's offered me a place to stay, and it's just like I think this also ties into being Canadian, but just like living in the city and being so nice, you build such great connections and relationships that it fosters um, something more than what a city usually is.
100%. So you are a media production student at Ryerson, right? And so, and you talked about working in music and in the entertainment sector. So, can you tell me a little bit about that? Because that is an area of Toronto that I am personally, and I'm sure many people are not super familiar with. And as someone growing into that sector, what is that like? What does that look like in Toronto?
I think with the media industry and entertainment industry here in Toronto, it is the best in Canada, and there's that really ties into how much we can offer for media, right? There's so much diversity in terms of the music genres here in the city. There's so much beautiful content and skyscrapers and buildings that a lot of people will end up shooting movies here and pretending that it's another city. Like Suicide Squad was
Hmm.
filmed here, and like they totally try to make it seem like an American city and stuff like that. And so I think there's a really booming industry here, and it's starting to be taken very seriously. which is really nice because it's also a lot cheaper to film in Toronto than it is to film in New York or LA and stuff like that.
For sure.
But for me, I think what I really like about the media industry here is it's, for lack of a better word, not superficial. I think like, in LA, everyone's expected to be, that six pack with a nice tan and the pearly white smile. But in Toronto, like everyone in front of the camera and behind the camera are so different looking. And that's something that's so important because we need to be seeing people in front of the camera that do look different, that have different body types, come from different backgrounds, speak on different issues. And I personally also think it's just as important to have a crew that also is made up of different pools of people as well. And Toronto really offers that. So whether it's like a PR firm or a marketing firm or, being on set as like a floor director and the editor and stuff like that, it really is a pocket of different people. And it's kind of like a community in a sense. And what's also really nice is it is a small industry here. It's large in terms of the outreach, but in terms of the people, like once you know one person in the media industry, you're going to see them at all the events and all the after parties and stuff like that. The MMVAs, I think, is a great example of just like going to this event annually every year, and you just you bump into the people that you see, and like, oh, how's it been? Or oh, I hear you're touring, or I hear you're like filming this new music video and stuff like that. So it's really interesting. I also love TIFF. I think that's a great thing that Toronto has that in the industry that is something we should be so proud of. And we also have like a very large social media industry here as well. We have a BuzzFeed Toronto here. We also have like Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. But we also have this very large like YouTuber-esque of Torontonians that have become pretty big over the last couple of years. Like I know a couple of them that I've met is like Democracy is really great. You see his like face all over Toronto. Superwoman's doing really well. She's from the GTA area-ish, which is super like cool, and she embraces that Canadian love and stuff like that. There's like Lord DIY, who studied at Ryerson, lived in Toronto for a really long time, and I think with influencers like that, just kind of showing the everyday life of Toronto, it's really benefited the city just as much as Drake's like views from the Six has as well, right? It's like
it's true.
The city
it's
has,
true.
Yeah, the city has like a brand to it, and it's really thanks to the media industry and like the influence that people on and off screen have.
It's very true, and I like your note about the fact that there's that natural authenticity both behind and in front of the camera versus, I guess, other aspects of media or film where they've almost, I guess, typecasted a nation in terms of how you have to look to be on the camera. And I like that. I like that note. I like that note about having different people, different body types, different looks here in the city. I mean, going to Ryerson myself, I was introduced to hundreds of different looks and perspectives and whatnot. It was exciting and it was interesting. But I think my next question for you is possibly a complex one because it was an idea that was introduced in a previous episode of Toronto Story Archive. And it touches on what you mentioned regarding the fact that people from Hollywood, for instance, will come and film in Toronto, like the Suicide Squad, and pitch it as a different city. So my question is, as someone who's growing in media, growing in marketing, growing in that entertainment sector, how do you think that we can move Toronto from a place where film companies go to film I guess a cheaper version of a city in the United States and make it a city that people not only want to film in, but base those movies in and of themselves? Because right now, it's like you said, like even like I think Suits films here and pitches it as New York. So how do we get this city to the point where it's not like people are coming here because they're like, oh, well, we need New York, but we don't actually want to do this in New York because it's super expensive, so let's come to Toronto too. Why don't we put this in Toronto? Why don't we set this here and then also come in film here, if that makes sense?
A movie I watched actually recently for class was called Chloe, and they completely film it in Toronto. Like they even have a scene in Allen Gardens and like the Primrose Hotel, and like they name these things that are Toronto, and not once do any of the characters say, "Oh, Toronto," or like, "I'm in Toronto." Like they just like make it this ambiguous city, and I agree with you. There's such a shame in that, because we are such a great city, and I think we do have a lot to thank for like the new branding of it, and like how we are being put on the map and seen about across the globe. But it's also something that I think isn't just a Toronto thing; it's kind of a Canada thing. A lot of people just don't take us seriously, which is so unfortunate, because we have a really great country, and we have so many great content creators and people here, and it's just one of those things where, we just have to start, because I think there's something in the film industry specifically where a lot of people will say like, "Oh, you can tell like this is a Canadian film or Canadian television show because it is lower quality, it is lower budget and stuff like that." But it's just, we have to start doing things that it isn't seen as this is a Canadian film as like a bad thing. It should be like, this is a Canadian film and it rocks. And just kind of building greater content. Like I think something that's so unfortunate is Canada doesn't really have like a late night talk show that is like known across the globe. We have like what, Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, James Corden, all the Jays are hosting some kind of show, and it's like, where's Canada? Like we do have great hosts here, and like there's a great opportunity to do a carpool karaoke around here, or even like we have Marilyn Dennis, but like when you say Marilyn Dennis and Ellen DeGeneres, like obviously one is more well known than the other, and not to discredit either of them. Like, they're both equally amazing and do different works of product. But it's just like, I wish people Canadian broadcasters and content were getting more exposure. And I think with that means we have to start moving onto an online platform where we can access across the globe. We're selling our content to American distributors, and a lot of our content actually in Canada gets distributed in like New Zealand and England or Australia, which is so, it's great that we have that platform, but our downstairs neighbors of the United States are the largest pool in the industry. And going back to the music industry, like Alessia Cara and Justin Bieber, right? Or Carly Rae Jepsen, like these are huge Canadians that get big after an American discovers them, and it goes through American marketing and it hits American stations. Like we have great Canadians like Marianas Trench and Lights, who are awesome musicians and some of my favorites, but they don't get American like radio play or like as big as the other artists do, and that's why they get like categorized as just a Canadian artist, right? Like I think with Justin Bieber, like he doesn't fall under that Canadian artist anymore because he's just like international all across the globe, and I think it's just kind of breaking through these barriers where it's just like, yeah, I'm Canadian, but I can make great content. Like I don't have this like staple attachment to me,
It's very true. I guess in a way it's rewriting the story, right? Because in many ways, a lot of how we perceive things in the world around us are stories that have been told to us, or we have told ourselves over time. So, for instance, the United States has ruled the movie industry and the film industry and the music industry for a very, very long time. And this is a story that we've told ourselves and that we have, in a very real way, bought into. But I guess it doesn't have to be that way. And I think the first step then, if I'm reading you right, if I'm reading what you're saying, is finding a way to tell ourselves a different narrative. And not only that, but taking the initiative as a city, as a country, to try to match the level of sponsorship and exposure that the United States gives its artists.
Yeah, it's just kind of, I don't know. It is like when you think of us internationally as well. It's very funny because when I do travel abroad, the second someone sees me, they think American, and then when I mention that I'm Canadian, I get treated a lot differently. For sure. But our content is the exact same, As like I think as people, like sometimes I get treated nicer when I mention I'm Canadian. But sometimes when if I just like don't mention anything and people assume I'm American, I get taken more seriously. And the content's the exact same. Like if you just submit a content like a film and someone's just like, wow, like that's a great film, it's just, that's what they'll say because they'll just assume it was like made in like the United States. But then when it's like submitted and it has a name like Canadian film, it's kind of like people are like, oh, like pat on the back, like congrats, like
Good for you.
very more, yeah, like more fluffed up, and I don't get that. And it's just like you said, we have to rewrite that story and just like, you know, be proud of like we live in a great nation with free healthcare, thank God. And I think it's something that, especially, you know, not to like throw shade to America right now, but there's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of things happening in the States right now that I'm still shocked are happening. And I think this
Absolutely.
is a really great time for us as Canadians and content creators, and just like even just like a young demographic in general, to just rise up and be like, this is the content we need to be seeing. This is the like government we want to see leading our nation, and just really going into that transition stage of rewriting the story, as you were mentioning.
I guess it's our opportunity, as much as it is, you know, as much as it sucks to take such an opportunity, or that the opportunity exists in this content or context rather. It is an opportunity to shine, an opportunity to differentiate. So on the entertainment front, then, I mean, you have a fairly unique perspective, because you're not, I guess, as tenured in the industry. You're building your career within it. So I mean, there's this, I guess, age old perspective out there. At least it's a perspective that existed when I was growing up. You know, that you got to go into it and you got to be, you know, in business and an accountant, or like a lawyer or a doctor, or one of those old staple careers that give you a very, very specific way of going through and earning your income and building your career in this world. So you're someone who's right in the trenches right now, right in the trenches of the entertainment sector, which is something that a lot of people want to go into on some level. I mean, I've always been intrigued by the entertainment sector, right? But I've never taken the step to really get into it. So what are your thoughts for people who are looking for an opportunity to get into that industry, or who are maybe, I guess, a little afraid to take the leap?
I think with that, it was actually my parents who I really appreciate supporting me and making the decision to like go into the entertainment industry, because like you said, there is like a tension of, oh my God, what if I don't make it, or it's an unstable career and stuff like that. But my parents, being two immigrants here who gave up, my mom was a singer and actress, and my dad was a well-known like architect and carpenter, and they moved here, and now they work factory jobs. And they just said, like, we moved here because we want to make sure that you're happy with your career and have the best opportunities. So if you want to be a doctor, do it. If you want to be an actor, do it. If you want to be a nurse, like, go for it. We just want to make sure that you're happy. And I think with going into the media industry, like, you need to do it in a sense that you're just going to love what you do. And it's very similar to dating, I think, in the sense that, like, if you're feeling it, like, you get that you get that gut feeling, like, you know what, if you're on a Tinder date or a blind date, or you just meet someone for the first time, you get that butterfly feeling where this feels good, like this, I can see this going somewhere. And I think your career has to be the exact same thing. Like, if you pick up a camera and it feels good, or if you're in front of the camera and you like that, or you like writing scripts, or budgeting and bringing in finances and sponsorships for a film or a web series, then do it. Like, there shouldn't be any hesitation holding you back, because I know there's real life and paying the bills and stuff like that, but you never know unless you try. And it's the same thing with a crush. Like, if you don't tell that person that you like them, like, it's never going to become something. So same thing with your career. If you never go and pursue it, like, it's not going to ever go anywhere. And I'm speaking from like the media industry, but same thing goes for if you want to be a teacher. Like, if you want to be a teacher, you got to apply for those jobs. Like, you substitute as much as you can until you get that that job that you want. And what also with me, like, I guess, as I mentioned in the beginning stages of this, I like constant change, just like the city. It's something new every day. And with media, it's exactly that. It's never going to be the same thing every day. Like, there's going to be different film sets. You're going to work with different actors. You're like, if I want to be an on-screen broadcaster one day and have my own like TV show similar to like James Corden or Jimmy Fallon or Ellen and Marilyn Dennis and all that stuff. So, like, a different interview every day, a different audience, and I think a different crew, because your crew is going to have real life things, like, oh, like Jimmy, who was our camera op, like, he just had a kid, he's taking 1 month leave, like, awesome. And like supporting that, and then bringing someone new in, and just it's just not stationary, and that's what I like. And I think if that interests people, like, go for it, because your job has to be so fun, because realistically, like, you're gonna work your job um, from when you get it until you retire. Like, that's essentially the dream. So if for me, like, I want to be rotating constantly in my industry. Like, I never ever want it to be like, okay, cool, like, I got my dream job, like, that's it. I'm always going to be cool. Like this summer, I'm interning for the Cannes Film Festival, which is so exciting. But
Oh,
now
that's
I'm like,
fantastic.
thank you. It's just kind of like, it's so exciting. It's a great achievement that I'm very proud to take on. But I'm already thinking, okay, what's next? Like, where can I intern in September? Or where can I work after school? And like, like, I want to shoot this web series and I want to do this, and kind of keeping my plate busy, because it's your life. You can't just stay, like, you can't just sit down and expect things to come to you. You have to, like, work for them and, like, make them happen yourself. And with the Canadian industry, like, that's kind of how it is. Like, if you want something to happen, you have to do it. And that's what I really like, and that's why I think people thrive in the Canadian industry, because the ones that really seek it and really want to go and do it are the ones that are going to make it happen no matter what.
I like that. And your parents seem very wise, like very, very wise people. And
They are, yeah.
I like your allusion, your comparison to, finding that career in media being kind of like dating. So I mean you introduced the topic. So I have to ask, because I feel like, we've come from I guess on some level similar backgrounds, moving in here from a new city, from a small city, experiencing the bigger city, the bigger place. And I mean, personally, I've been lucky in recent history to have met and now be engaged to Sarah, my fiance. So I mean, how have you found finding? Thank you. Have you found finding love in the big city?
I think I'm currently single, so I'll just start it off with that to make it very simple. I think in my first year in my first year in university, it was very, I don't know what it was, but I think it was just like the first, like, Tinder had just come out. So it was one of those things where I was like going on dates, like, yeah, I was like going on dates like constantly, and it's fun, because to me a date is this opportunity to get to know someone. And I don't want to say unfortunately, but like, honestly, like, most of my dates have just turned out to be like now some of my greatest friends. Like, I think it's the way life works. And sometimes you're gonna meet someone and you think you really click, and like sometimes they might not think it's the right fit. It's kind of tying back to that job opportunity. Like, you might see a job posting online and you're like, this is me, like, I am the perfect candidate for this, and they might say, you know what, there's actually someone better qualified for this. And that's I think just a learning experience I've gone through, and that's something everyone is at some point, unless you're like super lucky and the first person you date is like the one, then congratulations. But that is very rare, So
very rare.
Yeah, I think for me right now, I'm very happy with where I am. Like, and I think, I don't know, like, I'm 20, turning 21, and I'm so young. Like, I'm not, I don't know, there was a point where I think all I wanted was to experience what a relationship would be like. But then my career and my school started doing, there was like a lot of opportunities coming about, and I'm like, why am I spending all this time trying to invest in someone else when I really should be investing in myself? Like, I should be going to the gym. I should be, checking out those job opportunities. I should be, and I should be going on dates, like, casually, but also going on dates with, like, and like, I use the word date loosely, like going on dates with your friends, going on dates with yourself, going on dates with possible employers, like, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to networking nights, gotten someone's card, and like followed up and like, hey, like, can we go for coffee? Like, or if you're in the office, like, I will drop off a coffee for you. I just like to see your workplace, and you tell me how you got to where you are. And it's really paid off. Has it paid off in my love life? No, but again, I'm also 20 years old. So it's like,
no, you've got tons of time.
I have so much time. And I think that's the beauty of Toronto, though, is that it's such a big city. And, for all I know, like, the person I might marry isn't even in the city, or maybe I've already met them and, like, I don't even know, right? And I think just like with anything, these things happen. But just like what I said before, you can't wait for it to happen. You have to, like, you can't just sit around and hope if someone will come on a horse or in a carriage or in a castle and like
For sure.
make things better for you. Like continue doing your life, and it will happen when it's supposed to happen. And I think if something that I've learned is, you know, if you want something to work out, and if it doesn't, that sucks, but make something out of that. Like learn from that experience and grow from it. Or, you know, I think Meryl Streep said this at the Oscars this year, and it was a quote from Carrie Fisher, and it was like, take your broken heart and make it into art. And I think there's so much beauty in that.
That's
Because if you look at
fantastic.
right, like if you look at it, I always go back to this experience when everyone, like when anyone tries to like ask me about how it is to be single, I'm like, you know what, it's great, but and like look at Adele. Like Adele took this like heartbroken experience and like made a like ginormous career and like a beautiful album, multiple beautiful albums out of it. And you know, it's good to be single in the city because you can have fun, you can see your friends, and when it happens, it's gonna happen, and it's gonna happen when you least expect it. Like it could be at a bar, it could be at the grocery store, and I think with Toronto, that's kind of the cool thing about that. Because if anything, I've learned as well is like a lot of people here are gutless. Like I was at a like school cafeteria, and I was speaking Portuguese on the phone with my mom, and after I hung up, someone just came up to me and they're like, "Oh, I'm Portuguese too. I want to take you out on a date." And I was like, "Oh, wow,
Whoa,
like that."
okay.
Like yeah, I was like in my small town, like that is not like my small town would be like, "Oh, I just like their like Instagram posts, so maybe they'll think I like them now or something." Like it's very like minuscule steps. Like here, it's like you go for it, and if it doesn't work, like awesome, like on to the next thing, like or I'm just gonna better myself and do something else, and that's really cool, and it's a learning experience and something to grow from, and I really enjoy being young and being able to do that. Will I enjoy that when I'm like 45 and maybe single? Like I don't know, but right now I'm enjoying it for sure.
100%. That makes a lot of sense. You know, you never know. I remember, you know, back when I was in university, back before that even, how much I desired and pushed for and wanted that relationship, and it only ended up being, you know, a couple of years out of school that one day a friend of mine was coming to meet me to go out to a party, and my friend's phone died. And so my friend asked this random group of strangers to borrow one of their phones. And the person that lent my friend that phone is the person who is now my fiance, because she had my number, so she texted me to make sure my friend got there okay later, and we started talking, and now, you know, a little over 2 years later, and we're engaged. So it's always it's the weirdest and strangest circumstances that lead you there. And you know, all that, and I enjoyed the hell out of life, you know, but all that waiting, I mean, on one hand I want to say it paid off, but on the other hand you look back and you're like, what was I waiting for? It's going to happen when it happens, you know?
Exactly. And I think it's so toxic to hold on to something where you're like, this could have been something so great, and if it doesn't work out, like, yeah, that sucks. Move on. Like, do something with that. Like, I can't tell you how many times I have a personal trainer, and I just like kind of he tells me about like new clients and stuff because we're also really good friends, and he said like it's so motivating to see someone after a relationship being like, I'm going to get into shape, or I'm going to better myself because I don't need to like hold on to this like sad thing anymore, you know? And
Absolutely.
yeah, it's really cool. And I think, you know, I haven't really dated a lot of people also as well, again, because I'm also 20, so I'm like pretty young. And like anyone who I've like dated or liked or anything like that, like I've never had like obviously I wasn't like best friends with them afterwards, but like I don't have hard feelings for them. Some of them I still, you know, keep in touch with or go out for coffee with occasionally, just like catch up and see how we're doing. And I think that's something just with being a nice person. Like it's something that someone once said is like, you don't have to, if someone's not meant to be in your life, they like don't force them in there. Like, your life is kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, and like there's pieces that are supposed to fit naturally. And if you take a piece that's from someone else's puzzle, it's like obviously not going to fit in the picture. So like make sure with your career, your life, like your diet, your health routine and all that stuff. Like it has to fit perfectly. And if you know a piece isn't fitting perfectly, then it's not meant to be there. So that's something that someone once said to me, and it just always stuck. And I'm like, you're right. Like if this piece was supposed to be there in some capacity, whether that be a best friend, a relationship, or just like an acquaintance that I see maybe like once a year, then so be it.
For sure. And that makes a lot of sense. So we've talked a bunch about growth, I guess, within the city and how you've grown through the city. And I guess this is a broad question, but I'm interested if you can even choose a few things that you would identify with this. And how do you think then moving to Toronto has changed you and helped you grow?
I think coming from like a smaller town, I definitely was pretty insecure because I'm like 5'3", like I'm a really short guy, and I used to be pretty like overweight as well. So I think I just like built so much like insecurity about how I looked and how I sounded and all these other things. And I always, had this interest for television, and I just like in the back of my mind, I was just saying like, you don't look good enough for television. Like you won't be able to succeed. And coming to this city and really like seeing how everyone's supposed to look different, and everyone like that's our charm, is that none of us look like cookie cutter identical. And I mean, unless you're an identical twin, then you're like a special case. But in a realistic lens, like we're not supposed to look the same. And that's what I've learned here is like I really grew in my self-confidence and like living on my own, and not having your mom to do your laundry or like cook dinner. Like you have to do that stuff yourself. And like, one day a button fell off my jacket, and I'm like, yeah, like I could wait until my mom comes and visit me and like ask her to sew it, or I can Google it myself and do it because like I'm an adult now and I have to do these things. And I think there's a lot of importance in that. And I tell any of my friends who still live at home, it was the greatest decision of mine to leave and go somewhere where my parents are like only an hour and a half away, like enough where I still force myself to do things on my own and grow, and I didn't know anyone coming into the city, so force myself to make friends. And it's also the first time in your life when you move out of the house or like into a new city where you get to decide who you're going to be friends with. You get to decide what your room's actually going to look like, or what the clothes you're going to wear, and what you're going to eat, because you're the owner of your life. And it's with moving to Toronto, I just kind of like took the wheel and what I wanted to do. And sometimes I've made the bad decisions, like Gracie's. I've made a lot of bad decisions at 100%. But
haven't we all?
That's true. Honestly, haven't we all? But that's a part of learning and growing. And I think you can obviously learn that anywhere, but learning that in a city with so many people around you. And I mentioned this briefly already, but you also learn a lot through other people's experiences. And like you were an ex-class speaker, and like you do speeches and stuff like that as well. And I think hearing other people's speeches and experiences, like you grow from that as well, because you might not go through that experience, but hearing their words, like it shapes the way you think. And that's also another reason why I love film and media so much. Like, I never, I don't want to say never, but like hopefully I don't think I'll ever experience a war, but like you can watch a war movie and like really see what those people went through and what that trauma and all that was like. And, that shapes you to now how you think about war and all that stuff. But it's through other people's experiences that we learn and grow, but also through our own. And I think having been in a big city with like an eclectic group of people from different backgrounds, like it's really shaped me and helped me grow as a person. And I feel like I keep saying the same thing over and over again, just with like different flares to it. But I can't thank Toronto enough for being the place that helped me realize who I'm meant to be and how I want to be too.
That's fantastic. And I think that is something that can affect with a lot of people, myself included. So with that in mind, Michael, I guess the last question that I have for you today is the second major question that we ask everyone who comes on Toronto Story Archive. And that is, if you could recommend one place to go or one thing to do in Toronto, what would that be?
Oh my God, that's so hard. There's so many things. That's hard because there's so many places that are super sentimental to me. There's Trinity Bellwoods that kind of has a soft spot for me because I grew up having a park in my backyard, and I love big parks and stuff like that. And it's also close to Little Portugal. and so it has like that sentiment to it. And I don't go to it often, but I love Trinity Bellwoods. I also love the Distillery District. Like I love it during Christmas. I love it during summer, and it's just always a happy place to go. But I guess like one place, because it's close to downtown, and I always kind of go to it when I'm sad, or it just kind of like has a special place, like a special place in my heart, is Allen Gardens. It's like this garden greenhouse type of thing, and it's so beautiful. And it's also like, it's not something that everyone knows, I guess, but it's so close to Ryerson, it's so close to downtown, and especially when you're stuck in the city and you miss nature, like going to this greenhouse full of beautiful flowers, like there's something so tranquil about it. And especially if you're like me and you come from a small town, like I came from a small town where people had like beautiful gardens filled with every flower imaginable, and I just love seeing those flowers because it brings me back to like a more peaceful state of mind. And through the hustle and bustle of the city, sometimes you need that. So if you haven't gone to Allen Gardens yet, I would definitely recommend it, because there's something pleasant about it, and sometimes we need to take in the pleasantries in life.
I feel that completely. I love that. That is a fantastic sentiment. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us on Toronto Story Archive. It has been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a blast.
Fantastic. And that's a wrap for this week's episode of Toronto Story Archive. Each episode, we bring on guests from Toronto to tell us a story, any story about their life in the city. Our commitment is to not sell, pitch, or bore you. Our goal is to amuse, excite, and at the end of the day, entertain you with stories told by the many voices Toronto has to offer. If you have a story to share, shoot me an email to submissions@torontostoryarchive.com. My name is Mo Waja, and thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Toronto Story Archive.